The GPS DairyCAST features the high-value insights of the GPS Dairy Consulting team's trusted advisors and the owners and managers from the elite dairy farms they serve. These conversations deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders.
Welcome to the GPS DairyCAST. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen from the Up Level Dairy Podcast. And on this episode today, we're getting into a topic that is a struggle for so many farms, and that is the ability to stay connected with your team, especially as you grow and scale. The ability to keep everyone on the same page, moving forward at your desired pace, going to the same place to hit those goals. And to talk about this subject today, we have GPS Dairy Consultant team member with us today, Stephanie Jens. Welcome, Steph.
Hi, Peggy. It's great to be with you today.
You too, Steph. And take a minute and introduce yourself to our listeners here on the GPS DairyCAST.
Certainly. So Steph Jens, and I have been with the GPS team for about 2.5 years now in the role of Business Development Director. And that allows me to work across a number of different tasks for the team, but my focus is really on the business and supporting the consultants. So a large part of my time is looking for new teammates to join our team and then helping them through that onboarding process, supporting them as they grow their businesses and service their clients as well. I get to do a little bit of brand development as well as then continue to meet with the consultants one-on-one and really help them develop their businesses even further.
So, Steph, as you help to grow and develop the GPS consulting team, we're hitting on a subject today that's something that you are dealing with as well, because you have a team that is growing and you have a business with GPS that is scaling as well, just in lockstep with so many of the dairies that your team serves. And so this will be great to have you as an expert on this subject matter, because you're living this every single day in your world too, aren't you?
We are in a little bit of a similar way. Yeah, certainly all the consultants are independent, but it doesn't necessarily matter if they're direct reports or not. It's so important to have key communications with them on a regular basis. And that's where I see it parlay really nicely with what happens on farms as well.
So, Steph, when we talk about this subject of staying connected with a team so that the direct reports and all of those people that then are part of the larger and bigger picture are moving in the same direction, to go into the same place and going there at the right pace. What are some of the challenges that you hear from some of your consulting team members when they're out working with dairies? What are the problems that arise and that you and your team hear about?
Yeah, great question. I think a big part of it is as teams grow, more and more individuals are introduced into the situation, right? And they're each taking on new roles. So from our consultants' perspective, they really need to stay connected with multiple people on the farm and making sure that, like you mentioned, everybody's working towards those same goals. So communication becomes really important, and not just with one individual on the farm, but with multiple individuals. And if that communication doesn't happen, that's where sometimes we misstep or tasks don't get completed like they're supposed to. So having those key communication lines in place is what can really help prevent some of that.
So the problems that arise on the back end are perhaps things aren't getting done, or maybe people don't understand what their duties are, what those expectations might be. And as you peel back the layers, it sometimes can come back to the root of the challenge, and that's having that one-on-one regular and direct communication with the team leads, those direct reports. So you have actually spent a lot of time digging into this topic, learning about this topic of being able to keep teams connected, and actually come up with a way to do this in 5 steps. And so we're going to walk through these 5 steps with you today, Steph. And so kick us off. What is step number 1 for our listeners to be able to get their team engaged on the same page and moving forward?
Yeah, so I can't take any credit. I've dug into a lot of, if you look up one-on-one conversations online, you'll find a lot of different ways to put them together and a way to implement them. And I picked what I felt was most important, especially for when you're working with a team on a farm too. So one of the first things is in these one-on-one conversations that you might be having with your direct reports is to set a consistent schedule The suggestion that's out in several of the programs is to do this on a weekly basis. And so that means setting it on the calendar, not just saying, let's meet next Tuesday sometime when I'm free. Well, that doesn't necessarily tell your direct report that, hey, this is important. I want to set a time. So it is really important to say, let's meet Tuesdays at 10 a.m. or whatever that time might be. So not only is it on your calendar, but now your direct report feels like, okay, I have a time slot. This is important to my manager. This is a time when we can get together. Now, if it happens that something comes up on Tuesday at 10 a.m., that doesn't mean you can't reschedule it, but having it there, it's just much more likely that it will get done, or you'll move it to another time and date that will work for both parties.
So, step number one, and we're really addressing this one-on-one conversation, is to put it on the schedule, put it on a calendar. You mentioned weekly, Steph. Do you feel like for dairies, that's the sweet spot?
That's kind of the feedback that we've gotten. Now, a small caveat, when I meet with our consultants, it's not on a weekly basis. It's more closer to a monthly basis. So I would probably encourage farms to figure that out on their own, what works best. But the reason that weekly is suggested is just because so many tasks are happening every day. And on a dairy, we know how often that changes, right? That changes with outside elements that come in. So weekly is probably the feedback that we've gotten from clients that works the best.
So, weekly one-on-one meetings, put them on a schedule, set them on a calendar, have a regular, recurring, expected day of the week and time of the day for these meetings. That's step number one. Steph, what have you outlined as step number two to setting up these one-on-one meetings to keep the team connected and moving forward?
Step number two would be considering the meeting environment. So when we think of a farm, there's a lot of chaos going on farms, right? So when you think about where's the best place to have this one-on-one meeting, it might not be the break room, right? Where there's a lot of activity or people coming in and out of the parlor. You're going to want to hold this meeting in a quiet room where you, as a manager, can really focus your time and energy on your teammate, right? So to give them the one on one direct focus so that the meeting can really focus around them. So consider the meeting environment and make sure it's in a place that you're able to have that conversation. You're able to listen clearly and there's not outside distractions that come in.
When you talk about being able to create this environment where people feel open to share, where they can feel seen and heard, that's really what we're doing when we create these spaces, is what I'm hearing from you, Steph. And as the person that's the leader of the meeting, right, you talked about using that eye contact, active listening. And so as much as the meeting environment is about removing distractions and interruptions, it's also for a person in leadership, it's about channeling your own focus by removing some of those distractions, right?
Absolutely. And you brought up a good point. It really is a place where they may share concerns too. So that's probably not a good idea to have this out in a public area, right? You want them to feel comfortable to be able to share any concerns they might have or questions that they have. So eliminating all the distractions is just a great way to create a safe space to meet together.
So 5 steps, Steph, that we're talking about today. First is about the time, setting a consistent time and schedule on a weekly basis. Number 2 is about the place, the location, this meeting environment that is free from distraction and focuses on that individual that you're having the one-on-one meeting with. What's step number 3 that you have for us today?
So step number 3, keeping a bit of a meeting structure. So these don't have to be hour-long meetings, right? We want them to be effective time-wise, but also communication-wise as well. So the main suggestion that I saw out there was like a 30-minute weekly meeting. So in that 30 minutes, making sure to structure that, and a suggested one is 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and 10 minutes. So we'll break this up here. The first 10 minutes is always going to be for the employee or the direct report to share what's on their mind. It could be what's going on in their family life. It could be personal. It could be work related, whatever it is that they need to share with their manager. That's whatever they need to get off their chest. The next 10 minutes is reserved for then the manager. This can be a time where they can coach or give feedback on tasks that they've been working on, or if there's anything they need to, improve in the tasks that the employee is doing, or maybe challenge them with new tasks. That second 10 minutes is really reserved for them to do that coaching. Then the final 10 minutes can be reserved to talk a little bit more about the future, getting to understand what do they want to do in their role in the future? What do they maybe want to learn? How else would they like to grow within their position? It allows the manager to talk about maybe we have some upcoming changes in the futures and how will this impact their role. So there's a lot of different ways you could go about it. That's just one suggestion. But most importantly is however much time you allow up front for the direct report, make sure that you allow them the opportunity to go first. Because I think one of the challenges that we can see is maybe a manager comes in and really wants to hit a topic that he thinks is important. Well, before we know it, maybe 20 minutes has gone out of our 30 and our direct report hasn't even had a chance to share anything yet. So I think that is probably the primary goal, is letting them share first, and then you can keep the meeting moving from there.
You emphasize the importance of starting off that first third of the meeting, that first 10 minutes, with allowing the direct report to be the one to talk. And what a discipline that can bring in. And this is where structure is important, right? Because having a structure and an expectation for the direct report, but also for that person in management and leadership, is just as important to hold themselves accountable to. So listen first for the first third, and then leadership talk for that second third of the half hour. And then that last 10 minutes is about the what's next, future, next steps, and the where do we go from here conversation. So have you had or heard any stories of how this piece right here has had some positive results for dairies that your team might work with?
Yeah, so a couple, I would say. One of the big ones I think is improved engagement in teammates and getting them more bought into the team and the business as a whole. So allowing them to share their thoughts, share their concerns, and doing it on a regular schedule really sets the stage for them to feel comfortable and be able to share those type of concerns that they might have. Whereas if they're not having regular meetings, when do they necessarily bring it up? They might just brush it under the rug. So it really allows employees to be able to give that feedback to their managers, and then they can work on it from there. So that would be one. The other one that I think I've heard a lot of is the amount of time that it saves. So take, for instance, if a manager is maybe putting out fires pretty much every day, all day long from his direct reports. Now, if your direct report knows that, hey, Tuesday at 10 a.m., I know I'm going to meet with my manager and I can bring these things up, they might not need to come every other single day and ask those little questions, because they know they have that time reserved with their manager. So one of the things we've learned or we've heard from clients is that although these 30-minute meetings take time, it ends up saving them time in the end, because they can address a lot of those concerns during that meeting.
What a great tip here, Steph, with the structure for these meetings, the 10, 10, and 10 structure that you suggested. That was step number 3 of this, of your suggestions for one-on-ones and to be able to keep teams connected and moving forward. What's step number 4?
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want to learn more about GPS Dairy Consulting, make sure to join our email list. Our announcements aren't just for GPS clients, but instead for anyone looking to advance their dairy business, learn more about GPS, and take a deeper dive into dairy farming hot topics. Stay in the loop with our once-weekly emails and have all GPS DairyCAST podcasts, blog posts, event announcements, and monthly newsletters sent straight to your inbox. You can join the GPS email list by clicking the link in the show notes.
So step number 4 is going to kind of fall in line more typically with how we would run all of our meetings, right? We want to finish with clear action items, not only for the direct report, but for both parties, really. So making sure that if there needs to be any action items on tasks or anything else that comes out of the discussion and there needs to be follow up, making sure that we set those deadlines, set a responsible party that is going to be held accountable for that. And this can be both, not only on the direct report, but the manager as well, right? To set those action items.
Excellent. And so what does that look like? Any examples that you can share where maybe someone on your team has seen this happen, where maybe there was an area that there were some goals set and having those deadlines and delegating a person who's in charge or responsible for certain actions led to a positive result?
Yeah, so I guess one I can kind of think of that I would see fits nicely into this is if we're having a meeting with a feeder on the team, and maybe there was a goal set of a certain action item of drop times of feed or something like that, and we just weren't hitting those. So it might be, let's really strive to adjust that and making sure when we set that task, like what is preventing that feeder now from being able to get that? And does that mean that maybe another teammate needs to pick up on another task that the feeder was doing so that he's able to drop feed on time? So it becomes a little bit of understanding maybe why the goal isn't getting hit, and then seeing if there's anything that's preventing that goal from getting hit and aligning that. And so some of it might be what needs to get put into place to make sure that we can meet those goals. And that's really something that can be easily followed up on, right? So if we're having these weekly meetings, a really great time, that kind of leads into our next step here, but a really great time to follow up would be your next weekly meeting and understanding, were we able to accomplish that? Or if not, what prevented us from accomplishing that?
And you just gave a little teaser there, Steph, to step number 5. Go ahead and detail that for us a little bit more.
Yeah, so the final step is really the follow-up, because we can set all of the action items and goals that we want, but if we don't follow up with them, we don't really know if they're getting done, right? So we have these weekly meetings, we set the goals at the end of them. Don't be afraid as a manager to follow up midweek and say, how is it going? Has what we've done or changed helped you to be able to achieve that goal? But if not, if we don't do that midweek follow-up, another great time to do that is your next weekly meeting and understand, did it work? Did it not? Otherwise, how do we need to adjust things to reach those goals? So the follow-up, of course, although it seems like a short piece of it, is a really important piece.
That's the piece that ties it all together, right? It's the accountability, it's the measuring progress. And there's another piece with that too, Steph, that's about celebrating when there is success. Can you talk about that for a moment too?
Well, yeah, oftentimes on farms, there's so much to do every single day that most of the time it's just checking them off the list, right? So we often don't necessarily celebrate if we've worked through a challenge or we've completed a task that we weren't able to do before. So taking that time, and these meetings are a great place to do that. And every single direct report's going to be different. Some are going to like more of that positive feedback. Some may not need that as much. But the other point of these meetings is really getting to know each individual direct report and understanding how you can connect with them, how you can give them feedback on their tasks and their goals, because the better you can connect with them, I think the more engaged they'll be as an employee.
When you talk about connecting with employees and you using this 5-step process of having these one-on-one meetings, is it all about business at these meetings? Is it all about the work that needs to get done? Or have you heard and seen success as managers pull in the opportunity to get to know some of their people a little bit more personally during these times?
I think that's a big part of it, Peggy, is being able to connect with them when they are allowed to do their share at the beginning of the meeting, that 10 minutes. If it was me, I'd love for them to share something personal, to get to know what their kids are doing, where they're more about their family. That I think it's a huge part of the process, and it's how you become more connected and engaged with your teammates. So I think it also allows you to understand the individual better, and then how you can better coach them, right? And maybe how they're motivated to do better. All of that is part of the process in these weekly meetings, and just the time together, that devoted time, I think will allow a lot of managers to be able to blossom those relationships too.
And that devoted time that you just mentioned, Steph, that breaks back into these 5 steps that we've been covering today to be able to really make those connections from management to direct reports. And that's where it trickles down into the success of the entire team. So once again, we talked about step number 1, setting that consistent schedule. Step number 2, having the dedicated environment, the space and the place to have these focused conversations, having them once a week, as you mentioned. And step number 3, putting a structure to it. Perhaps a 10, 10, and 10 recommendation, as you had shared. 10 minutes of giving the direct report opportunity to share, 10 minutes of the manager having the floor, and 10 minutes to talk about moving forward. But wrapping in those conversations a little bit of personal connection as well. And step number 4 was being able to use that time to set clear action steps to move forward, to look for opportunities to troubleshoot, to be able to set the framework for accountability. And that leads to step number 5, the follow-up, the getting things done, making sure things are happening. And if they're not, reassessing what might be coming up and what might be preventing from being able to hit the goals that you have with that individual team member, but also for the entire team on the dairy. And Steph, great suggestions that you shared with us today. What more would you like to add? How have you and your team seen structures like this implemented for big picture success for your dairy clients with GPS?
Certainly getting in a more engaged individual on the team, right? But one of the things you might not think about that's a benefit from this is one of our clients specifically shared that after implementing these meetings, they noticed an increase in employee retention. So if you look at it the other way, their turnover rate of employees was much lower. And they equated a lot of that to these meetings and what had allowed them to get better connected with their employees and for them to share concerns. And anytime employees are able to do that, they feel like they're more part of the team, right? So it really allowed them to create a more engaged team. And when you start to think about the benefits of that, lower turnover, now we're talking about not having to find as many individuals and train as many individuals, which all have associated costs with them, right? So it kind of just starts to snowball there, some of the benefits that our clients have seen. And I think that's the really cool part that can come out of implementing something like this on farms.
Yeah, those are the big picture, long-term wins of doing the work, of putting together the schedule, dedicating the time and the space and the place, having the conversations, putting a structure around it, and being able to outline those objectives and following up to keep things moving. And Steph, you actually use this similar process for one-on-ones as you develop people within the GPS team. That's your role. So anything that you'd like to share from your personal experience being on the other side of this?
So I mentioned mine looked a little bit different. I don't meet quite as often, but what I really enjoy about it, we meet for a longer period of time, so an hour length, that allows us to dig in deeper to some of the challenges that they're dealing with maybe in growing their business. But what it really allows not only is that personal connection, but allows me to kind of be a sounding board for them and talk them through maybe what they're dealing with clients, or maybe just ask some different questions from a different perspective. So I hope that they feel it's really refreshing in the fact that I can offer some just questions and maybe looking at it from a different way, but also serve as a bit of an accountability piece, right? Because when we meet again, I'm going to ask, how'd that turn out? Or how much more progress have you made on that? So it also helps to serve, like we mentioned, as a bit of an accountability piece.
And Steph, this is a natural skill set for you. You are great at having these conversations. What a natural fit for you to be in this role at GPS. But for someone out listening right now that's saying, ooh, these type of conversations, they're hard, they're difficult, they're challenging. What can you do if that's you?
I would definitely say one of the first steps is really working on your listening. And this is something that I've worked on for a long time, right? So I'm your classic person that tries to multitask and do 5 things at once, and then you're never really doing anything good. But when you sit down and have a conversation with someone, I always have a notepad. Part of that's because my memory's not great, but I always have a notepad to take notes, but it allows you to even listen better. And when you truly listen, the questions come easily because we're all inquisitive people, right? So the questions come easily, but it's the hardest part is the listening part, right? Keeping the distractions to a minimum is key, and making sure that you're really there in the moment to focus and listen. And I think once you get that piece down, everything else kind of comes in pretty easily.
Well, excellent, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences and insights on this topic as someone who leads one-on-one conversations, as well as some of the stories and examples of successes from the GPS team as your folks are helping dairies across the country, around the world even, as they look to get their teams connected and move forward in the direction that they want to go. And Steph, anything else you want to add on this topic today?
I think I would just challenge some of the listeners out there, some of the farms out there to consider implementing these conversations. They don't have to look exactly like this. Find something that works for your farm, but I'd challenge them to give it a try and see how it changes engagement on the farm and see how it changes feedback that they receive from employees. I think it can have some really great outcomes for farms.
Spoken like a true accountability coach, laying out a challenge for the listeners today. And Stephanie, thank you for jumping on with us here for the GPS DairyCast. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen from the Up Level Dairy Podcast, and thanks for listening today.
The GPS DairyCast features conversations that deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders. If this GPS DairyCast has you looking for more ways to become an elite dairy producer, find more information in our show notes on how you can add a GPS advisor to your team.